Did you ever love an Impressionist painting so much you just wanted to step into the frame? You're not alone. The popular and controversial sculptor Seward Johnson feels the same way and has done something about it, in a big way. The current exhibit at the Corcoran Gallery, Beyond the Frame, Impressionism Revisited, chronicles the artist's quest to open the two-dimensional into the three-dimensional. Chief Curator Jacqueline Zerwer joins Canape in the canvas.
The exhibition really is about Seward Johnson's reinterpretation of famous paintings from the Impressionist era. I won't say they're all Impressionist paintings because Monet was not exactly an Impressionist and neither was Van Gogh. And here we are sitting in Van Gogh's bedroom. But it is, from an American perspective, an attempt to reinterpret those famous images that many of us are so familiar with. And what he's done is to recreate them in three dimensions. And so the idea is that you will recognize these scenes, but then you will have not only a visual experience, but you will also have a physical experience, and that is something very different. To be able to walk into a scene that you know so well really impresses upon you something that would not be possible otherwise. You also see things that you might not have seen before. I am still discovering things, for example, in Luncheon on the Grass. I never noticed that blue drapery on the ground was actually the naked lady's dress that she had just taken off. I mean, somehow I knew it was beautiful. I love the still life, but I had not registered that was her dress. So really what we wanted people to do was to enjoy themselves, because this is such an interactive kind of exhibition, and we also wanted people to learn something. One of the interesting things about this exhibition is the way in which Seward Johnson combines two technologies. The old technology, the lost wax process, which is what he uses for the sculptures, and the new technology, Photoshop, and the use of computers and complicated calculations that could only be done with computers in order to create the extraordinary backdrops for the life-size figures. And what he does is they recreated the background of a lot of these paintings without the figures. They stretched them out in such a way that they would be wide enough to fit into a curved space, because most of the backdrops are curved. There is a place where you stand where the perspective works perfectly in terms of the original painting. And certainly the juxtaposition of these two technologies, especially in a piece like the famous Caillebotte painting from the Art Institute of Chicago, Paris Rainy Day, it really works magnificently. Also, I should say there is another element of the new technology that was very important in this show, and that is in the other room size piece, which is Olympia's boudoir. All of the furniture and the furnishings that look as if they are from the 19th century were actually acquired through eBay. And I always like to point out to people that because of that, this exhibition could also not have taken place too many years ago, because that really was essential. As you walk through the grounds, there are hedges, and if you're adventurous, you might peek behind one of the hedges, and there you would find Luncheon on the Grass, Déjeuner sur l'herbe, which of course is one of the most famous paintings of all time. And to see it in that setting, he's recreated it, the figures life size, the little stream in the background, that figure, and to walk into that and to see the painting almost from behind is really quite extraordinary. Some of the most famous pieces that you can imagine, the Monet Luncheon on the Grass, Olympia. There are three couples also by Monet, Argenteuil, Père Latuis, in the Winter Garden. There also the Pfeiffer, which is quite wonderful. The boating party is one of our favorites, because from the right perspective, you see only what you see in the painting. But then when you walk around it, you discover that there are gate crashers and these four American sculptors who are drinking up all of Renoir's wine. So it's quite fun. And it continues that idea of really learning something, but also having a great time and not being intimidated by works of art, as some people often are when they come to a grand museum such as the Corcoran.
Every family is unhappy in its own way, goes the famous phrase. Generational conflict is nothing new, but the latest version is the tension between aging 60s activists and their conservative children now reaching middle age. The new tragic comic film, The Barbarian Invasions, by Denis Arcand, is already a hit in its native French Canada. The director talks to Canape about what his film tells us about our neighbors to the north and about ourselves.
Well, the title of my new movie is not very commercial. It's called Barbarian Invasions. And it is because 17 years ago I made a film that was quite popular, which was called The Decline of the American Empire. And since this is with the same characters, I was looking for a title that would, you know, be somehow in relation with the decline of the American Empire. And of course, what was corollary to the decline of the Roman Empire was the Barbarian Invasions. So I thought that might be a good subject for my film, a good title for my film. And then September 11 happened. So I thought that proved to me that this was the title I needed.
For everyone, there's a time for friendship, family, and finding out what's important in life. For this group of lifelong friends, the time is now.
Well, you know, you're always the barbarian of somebody. The barbarians are the people standing over the border on the other side. The term was invented by the Greeks. They considered themselves civilized, and they considered the rest of the world as the barbarians. In this film, my main character is a university professor, and is someone who has lived with books all his life, with ideas, with ideologies, and he has this son who's never read a book, who plays with his computer, has a cell phone, makes tons of money. And of course, to his father, he is the prince of the barbarians. And his father says so himself.
C'est quand même pas l'autre bout du monde, Baltimore. 7 heures de route, 1 heure d'avion, t'es à côté.
Je ne vais pas m'exiler aux États-Unis, ce n'est pas vrai.
Ça t'intéresserait pas d'avoir une chambre à toi, avec des fauteuils pour tes visiteurs, une salle de bain, des CD?
Quel CD?
Ben, pour écouter de la musique quand on aura envie. Dans les pays civilisés, ils ont ça. Ils ont l'air climatisés aussi.
Tu sais comment ça coûte, ces chambres-là?
Rien, ça coûte rien, je m'en occupe.
Et je connais pas un chat là-bas.
On y va tous les 4, on part demain.
Non, on ne part pas. Je ne vais pas aux États-Unis. J'ai pas envie de mourir assassiné par des mahométans enragés.
Il est fou.
À l'époque, j'ai voté pour la nationalisation des hôpitaux. Je suis capable d'assumer les conséquences de mes actes.
Il y a juste les idiots qui changent pas d'opinion.
Je veux être entouré de mes amis.
Sont où tes amis? J'en vois pas d'amis ici.
Dominique est en voyage, mais Pierre...
Ben, en attendant, il y a personne. Là. À part la folle qui t'a fait une scène ce matin, c'est d'elle que tu vas t'ennuyer.
Quelle folle?
Ça n'a aucun rapport.
Les sanglots, les yeux au ciel. Mon Rémi, mon Rémi.
Voyons. Qui ça?
Marlène Dupire.
T'as pas couché avec Marlène Dupire? C'est une folle finie, tout le monde sait ça.
The danger in depicting a subject like this one, someone who's going to die, is to end up with a very desperate film, a very bleak one. And this I didn't want to do. I wanted to make a film about the whole of life, which means that it's a cycle. You die and other people go on and so on. So I took great care of having lots of characters. Some of them are younger, some of them are older. And as one passes away, the other ones are going to go on and live. To me, that was extremely important. It was important also to have moments of comedy, to have laughter and friendship, because ultimately those are the things that matters in life.
Bonjour. Bonjour. Ça donc bien fumé ici, vous n'avez pas pris la cigarette, j'espère? Oh non, non, ça jamais. Non, ça c'est un cierge que j'allume pour mes méditations. Ah bon? Vous n'avez pas de soluté, vous? Non, c'est le docteur Lévesque. Lévesque, c'est lui qui m'a ôté ça. Bonjour, mes médecines. Prenez une grande respiration. Vous avez toujours des douleurs ici?
Ah, ouais. Oui.
Et ici aussi?
Là aussi, oui.
C'est rien d'insupportable.
Ah, mon Dieu, non.
Vous avez l'air en forme, vous? Vous êtes relax, hein?
J'ai parfaitement relax.
Pas de problème de sommeil?
Je dors comme un enfant.
Ouais. Je pensais vous prescrire des analgésiques, mais l'impression que ce ne sera pas nécessaire.
Oubliez ça.
Ça, c'est formidable. Je dis toujours que le plus longtemps un malade peut garder sa lucidité, le mieux c'est.
J'ai bien l'intention d'être lucide jusqu'à ma mort, docteur.
Bon, ben tout ça m'a l'air excellent, M. Parenteau.
Merci infiniment, docteur Dubé.
Moi, c'est pas le docteur Dubé.
Ah, ben ça tombe bien parce que je suis pas M. Parenteau.
The 18th century was a revolutionary age in more ways than one. Traditionally, the most prestigious paintings were of historical subjects. But we all want to see our own world. The rapid rise in popularity of peinture de genre, genre painting, followed that impulse. Scenes of life from the countryside to the royal court became fashionable and widely available. A major exhibit at the National Gallery of Art gives an overview of this impressive tradition that wasn't afraid to tell a story or shed a tear. Senior curator Philip Conisbee is Canape's faithful guide into the territory.
Our exhibition is called The Age of Watteau, Chardin and Fragonard, masterpieces of French genre painting. And it's the first exhibition ever devoted to this type of painting. That's to say, scenes of everyday life, be it real or imagined, painted in France during the 18th century. The exhibition covers the entire century from the Regency period early in the 18th century right through the French Revolution and into the early years of the 19th century. And what we see in that period is a transition from the very elegant, courtly, rather private world of a painter like Antoine Watteau with his Fête Galante, through the erotic works of a painter like Francois Boucher, to the more realistic depictions of bourgeois life by Chardin. And then, at the same time, we find an artist like Fragonard still looking back and working in the courtly way, even quite late into the century. The painting behind me here is by Jean-François de Troyes, who was one of the leading history painters in the early part of the 18th century. But he found that in the 1720s there was a better market for scenes of this kind, and it's called The Declaration of Love, and it shows a group of young noble men and women in a very elegant park, flirting, chatting with each other, and there's a young man in the foreground kneeling, presenting a posy to the woman in the fabulous silver dress. Now this kind of painting reflects in a very flattering way the life of the aristocracy. Well, the very first painter in the exhibition is Antoine Watteau, and he was an absolutely key figure for French painting early in the 18th century. He was the figure who essentially broke with the grand, rather pompous manner of 17th century history painting and began to depict very intimate scenes, usually of aristocratic life, though sometimes he took scenes of low life and common scenes as well. I mean, the masterpiece of his work in the exhibition is the so-called Venetian Pleasures, or Fête Vénitienne, which comes from the National Gallery of Scotland in Edinburgh. On the left-hand side of the painting, we see a self-portrait of Watteau playing the bagpipes, dressed in a rather rustic-looking costume. On the left side, there's a portrait of his friend, the painter Nicholas Virgils, and he's dancing with a very attractive young woman in the middle. There's clearly some sort of personal thing going on here between these three characters. We don't know quite what. When you walk through the galleries and you come to the wall, a wonderful wall of paintings by Jean-Baptiste Siméon Chardin, you'll see a quite different mood. There's quite a change from the courtly world of Watteau and de Troyes, which I was talking about earlier. If you take, for example, his painting called The Return from Market, you'll see an attractive kitchen maid who's returned from market. On the side, she's placed some large loaves of bread. She's got a leg of lamb in the basket. And she's paused on returning from market, and she's listening, glancing over her shoulder to an outer room where there's a conversation going on. You can just see the corner of a man's hat and face peeping round the door as he chats with another maid. In 1737, the Academy introduced for the first time in the history of art regular public art exhibitions held at the Salon in the Louvre. This meant that the audience for paintings was no longer an aristocratic one only, but involved a whole range of public people. People like us, if you like, could come and see works of art. And artists such as Chardin consequently adjusted their style to appeal to this wider, more bourgeois audience who weren't interested in the frou-frou of the court world. Fragonard looks back to the world of Watteau and his master, Francois Boucher. He continues working for a courtly, aristocratic clientele. Don't forget, these things work in parallel. You have a new bourgeois public, but at the same time, the old aristocratic public is still there, looking for works that give a flattering reflection of their leisurely lifestyle. You can take the famous Girl on a Bed with Her Dog from Munich, which is in the exhibition. Its eroticism is discreet, but nonetheless it's a highly erotic work. In the Fragonard room we have two paintings devoted to the subject of blind man's buff, attractive couples chasing each other around in the countryside and playing this popular game at the time, which had of course all sorts of flirtatious possibilities. Throughout the exhibition there's a huge variety of human emotion. That's one thing I would emphasize, is it's not just courtly elegance and erotic subject matter. There are subjects that can appeal to anyone and a real range of human emotion. There are paintings that celebrate childhood, paintings that celebrate what we now call family values, paintings also which are frankly erotic. Having said that, the exhibition is full also of true masterpieces of French painting of the 18th century. It was a time when the quality of craftsmanship was incredibly high, and you just see some of the most beautifully crafted objects in the history of art.
Recently, whose first two novels won the prestigious Prix Goncourt du Premier Roman and Prix Caz in France? Shan Sa is the answer. But isn't that a Chinese name? Yes, because she's Chinese, but lives in France and writes in French. Her third novel, The Girl Who Played Go, now translated into English, gives Americans a chance to know the narrative art of this multilingual young writer. In Manchuria in the 1930s, a young girl comes of age as the Japanese invade her land. Shan Sa visits Canape to tell us more.
The Girl Who Played Go is a story happened in 1937 when in the Manchuria, independent Manchuria, where Japanese government just installed the last emperor in Manchuria. The story happened in a small square called Square of the Thousand Wings. Chinese teenager, 16 years old girl, playing Go in that square, and one day she met very strange opponent, but she didn't know that this stranger came from far country, was a Japanese spy. And she went to that square of Thousand Wings with the other player for forgetting the terror of the war. And in the other side of the Go board, there's Japanese spy who sent by Japanese army to collect information about the Chinese resistance force. And day after day, in that square, he discovered the Chinese girl, and he discovered Chinese people, and he discovered the terror of the war, and all his military education, day after day, was just fallen down, and he became a real man. I was 16 years old when the Tiananmen Square event happened, and I saw the massacre in Beijing, and that's why I left China after 1 year later for France. And I, at the beginning of my writing of Girl Who Played Go, I gave a script to my French publisher, and it's 20 pages about Tiananmen Square event. But I realized at that time that the violence is still haunting me. The truth that I discovered in '89 in Tiananmen Square was that the life is so fragile, and the happiness is really fragile, and you can lost it one night, just on one night. So I wrote The Girl Who Played Go about the fragile condition of a human being, and about the impatience of a girl who wants to discover in the very brief instance of her life all the richness about a human being, love and sex and peace and dream. When I planned to write a novel, it's 4 years after my arrival in France. Well, at that time my French was really still very poor, but I would like to write because I always write in my life. This is I know that it is the meaning of my existence. I didn't think aloud. For me, French life is my new life, because I turned the page of Chinese past, and with 1989 event. So I didn't choose French language. That language came to me like the new path in my life. So I just took it, and even it was so hard. Now, today I just published my 4th novel in French. Today I can say I did very good choice. Maybe it was just the fate in my life.
While Picasso and Matisse were the beacons of Parisian modernism, their light spread in many directions. Born in Romania in 1903, Victor Brauner settled in Paris in 1930. By then, he had worked in styles that ranged in influences from Cézanne to the Expressionists to Dada. His creativity continued to move in multiple directions until his death in 1966. Canape takes a look at the new exhibit at Ubu Gallery, dedicated to this Romanian in Paris.
Ubu Gallery was founded in 1994 as a gallery of avant-garde art of the 20th century. The gallery is focused on art that was cutting edge in its time, that was at the forefront, the avant-garde. And so we do sometimes stray marginally into contemporary, but basically it's a gallery of historic avant-garde with a focus on between the wars movements, so principally Dada, Surrealism, Constructivism. I mean, Victor Brauner would be a case in point. He's very well known in France and is revered in Romania. The very early work in his early 20s was in a much more constructivist kind of Dada vein. When he went to Paris, obviously in 25 to 27, the Surrealist movement, he would have had substantial exposure to the movement. And when he returned to Paris in 30 or 31, he was in close touch with a number of artists who were involved with the Surrealists, either directly or indirectly. Jacques Hérold, with whom he made some of the cadaver exquise that we have in the exhibition, and also Tanguy was his neighbor. But by 1940, I mean, Brauner is clearly going in a very different direction. I mean, this painting, Au Crépuscule, is one of my favorites. You can see in this is a painting from 1938. We have these ghosts, these specters, and this woman emerging from this bear-like creature. So again, here we're dealing with the duality, the doppelganger, the body double, which is a theme that does persist or pervade a large body of the work. As we get into just a couple of years later, like 1940, as I said, the work sort of flattens out. the settings become less real, and the work becomes much bolder, more graphic, less recognizable, the reality, but much more iconographic. Large painting in the exhibition that you see when you enter is Birth of Subject Matter. It's a painting that very clearly explores the theme of duality. There are dark themes in Bronner's work. Part of that, I'm sure, is an outgrowth of the exposures that he had in childhood. I mean, growing up in the Carpathian Mountains of Romania. His father was a spiritualist, participated in seances, which is speaking to the dead. I mean, so obviously these themes and this exposure are reflected in the paintings. By 1945, Bronner is investigating other mediums. So in this case, he's used a wax. There's wax and incising, so that the painting actually has a three-dimensional character, and it has a depth of luminosity that you wouldn't necessarily find in a traditional oil on canvas. With the kind of floating disembodied figure and the candles, and sort of invoke a seance type quality. This painting, Le Lion Double, I guess the double lion, and you can see the lion's face between the double face of the woman. So again, exploring this theme of duality, double or doppelganger. Another theme that we haven't spoken about is the Cyclopean theme, which Victor Bronner did lose his left eye in a fight in 1938, I believe. Prior to having lost his eye, he paints these one-eyed figures or eyes, damaged eyes, over and over again in his work. Post this accident, he becomes obsessed with this Cyclopean theme, this one-eyed theme, and it just is repeated over and over and over again in his imagery.